As the temps start rising, I feel the familiar urge to refresh my closet, but I don't want to waste money on pieces I'll only wear once or for just one season. Thankfully, Quince changes that. Their clothes are timeless, lightweight, and far more elevated than anything else at this price. It finally feels like my wardrobe matches my standards. The best part is that Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices and premium fabrics and finishes, so you get to look good while feeling good. I'm pretty excited that I have upgraded my athleisure wardrobe for this summer. I bought a sweatshirt and a pair of wide-leg flow pants that are two of the softest items I own, and I plan to live in them. So join me in giving your summer closet an upgrade with Quince. Go to quince.com/POTC for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/POTC to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/POTC.
We listen to each other's episodes too. And I get so lit up when I'm listening to your episodes. I have a positive reaction when I'm learning something and the content is cool, but I have an even more positive reaction that's kind of like when I feel really proud of you because the interview is going really well.
It makes me feel old as a podcaster.
It's just helped me feel like a lifelong learner. And I have really appreciated the ideas. We sometimes have some really groundbreaking ideas, but then also the practical application of it, how it's really been helpful.
That was us, Jill, Yael, and Debbie, celebrating 300 episodes of Psychologists Off the Clock. We are 3 clinical psychologists here to bring you cutting-edge and science-based ideas from psychology to help you flourish in your relationships, work, and health.
I'm Dr. Debbie Sorensen, practicing in Mile High, Denver, Colorado, author of Act Daily Journal, the Act Daily Card Deck, and the upcoming book, Act for Burnout.
I'm Dr. Yael Schoenbrunn, a Boston-based clinical psychologist, assistant professor at Brown University, and author of the book, Work, Parent, Thrive.
And from coastal New England, I'm Dr. Jill Stoddard, author of Be Mighty, the Big Book of Act Metaphors, and the upcoming Imposter No More.
We hope you take what you learn here to build a rich and meaningful life.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock.
Hi, ladies. Happy 300th episode.
Happy 300th episode.
Woohoo. Thank you.
Can you believe it? This is so exciting.
It makes me feel old as a podcaster.
Actually, the other day I was thinking about when the podcast first started, how young my kids were. Wow, that gave me an indicator that we've been doing this a while, because I was thinking some of the earlier episodes were more oriented toward little kids, and now I'm doing all these preteen.
You see how your interests have evolved over time.
Yeah, listeners can probably tell a little bit what's going on in our lives and what we're most interested in by what the focus of the episodes is.
Yeah, I think that's really true. Well, we thought today we would just have a kind of behind the scenes conversation about what we love about Psychologists Off the Clock, what we've learned, the ways in which this is really values oriented for us, like basically just a celebration of 300 episodes.
Yeah, and one of the things we're going to do is we've all been thinking a little bit about some of the meaningful moments that we've experienced. We're going to have a few little flashback moments where we play some excerpts of some meaningful moments we've experienced in some of our previous episodes.
And maybe some never before heard bloopers?
Maybe. Maybe.
There might be some behind the scenes negotiations about what gets included and what.
As long as there's no public humiliation involved, right?
Maybe we can start by even just talking about what the podcast means to each of us. I always share with people that before you guys invited me to be a guest, because I wasn't a founding member of the podcast, I'm not sure I really knew what podcasts were. And it's so funny because just a few years later, it's such a central part of my life. It's what I spend a lot of time doing, but it's become something that brings a lot of vitality professionally and personally. And I always think that, my life is richer professionally, but I have so many more friends because of this podcast, you guys, but also the people that we have on and listeners through the book club. So it's just become such a central part of what really matters in my life. I would not have predicted it because I didn't know what they were.
I love that. Yeah, it's become connecting in a way that I don't think I would have predicted at the outset.
Yeah. And I think that team part of it is huge for me too, just having, because this truly is a collaborative effort. And maybe this is a good time to give a little nod to the people who have been a part of the podcast currently. We have a team and we have had a team of people, we've been doing this long enough that we've had some new people come on and some people who kind of get to a point where they decide to move on to other pastures. And I've so appreciated the people who have put heart and soul into this and just what a team endeavor it's been and how much that connection has mattered.
Well, maybe talk a little bit about the history that, for anyone who's a newer listener. Debbie, you began the podcast with Ray Littlewood and Diana Hill. And what year was that?
That was in 2016. So it's been 6.5 years about since we started it, which I would have never guessed back when we first started it up that it would be going this long, honestly. I mean, and I occasionally have this thought, like, does this make sense to be spending this much time doing this thing? But I feel the same way you do, right? The vitality, like I learn so much and it's so fun to do these interviews and have this experience that I can't give it up, at least not yet, maybe someday, but it is truly, it's kind of grown into this thing. It started with us just wanting to do this. It felt a little bit, at the time, it felt a little bit like we were just going to try it and see what happens. We didn't really know what we were doing. So we were trying to learn the technical stuff behind the scenes as we went, which took, of course, a lot of time and effort to do, a lot of late nights trying to figure out how to get this thing going from the tech perspective. And, we had a little bit of Jill, you have your book coming out soon, Imposter No More. We had a little bit of a feeling of like, well, who are we to put this into the world and what do we have to say? But I also felt like we felt compelled to share something with the world. And this was a format in which you can do that. And so we just sort of did it. And in hindsight, wow, that was sort of a courageous thing to do, right? To just create that and put it out into the world.
And there's so many gazillions of podcasts, I think, to still be going strong after 7 years and to be growing in listenership and to now have sponsors. It's really a testament to the work that you and Diana and Ray did right at the outset.
And I remember very early on, I read an article in the news about how there were all these podcasts out there and that the market was saturated and you have zero chance of your podcast going anywhere and feeling kind of demoralized by that. We had already started it, but it wasn't very far into it. And I mean, it's just proof that, there are so many more podcasts now than there were then 6.5 years ago, and some great ones. And we do get a lot of listeners. And just to think, sometimes if you have a calling to do something, if you have the sense of passion and purpose around it, don't get discouraged by something like that. Because I kind of thought, well, this is never going to go anywhere. Why bother? But I also felt like, why not just do it anyway? Who cares if we get listeners or whatever?
If you build it, they will come. My Field of Dreams reference.
Field of Dreams, yes.
It's a good example of process over outcome, because if you're focused on the outcome of, are we going to get X number of listeners or are we going to stay around for X number of years, then it's scary and it is demoralizing. But if you just focus on, what I want to do is share information and this is an interesting thing and a connecting thing, then it allows you to kind of stay in the game. And by focusing on the process, you're much more likely to get to the outcome, right? Hold the outcome lightly. That's something we talk about a lot on this podcast.
Yeah, for sure. Such a good point. And then, Yael, when did you join the podcast?
It was episode 20-something. I was on as a guest to talk about working parenthood. The first episode that I did was about straddling work and parenthood. And I was such an enthusiastic guest that you invited me to I think you invited me to sort of be a contributing guest host, not even like a co-host, but my first official interview of somebody else was with Alex Sujung Kim Pong, who I have remained really good friends with. And my second interview was with Barry Schwartz, who I've also collaborated with and developed a friendship with, which is kind of crazy because at the time, again, like I had no idea what I was doing, but I was like, ooh, I have a reason to contact these people who I am just a huge fan of and ask them the questions that come to my mind as I'm reading their books. Like, how amazing is that? So that was about 5.5 years ago that I joined.
How about you, Jill? Tell your story of when you joined.
I was on as a guest twice. Once, I don't know why I remember this episode number, but episode 77.
You remember it because we are constantly suggesting people check it out. It's still one of my favorites because it provides such a good ACT overview. Such a great episode.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Then I came on. Did I come on to talk about Be Mighty? Yeah, I think before I was a co-host.
No, it was actually, Jill, it was when
was it after?
Well, it was your first episode right when you were becoming a co-host because your book was coming out, Be Mighty, and we announced around that time that you're going to join us.
Yeah, you're right. So I think I joined like toward the end of 2019, which is the same time the book came out. And then my first interview was aired, I think, in early 2020.
Yeah.
Near Yael. I'll always remember my first interview.
Well, and we had toyed with the idea of inviting you on because we thought it would be nice to have another co-host. And we just remembered really liking you and liking your interview that you did. And then you reached out to us about potentially starting your own podcast because you were toying with that idea. And we were like, okay, we have to ask her because she's going to go start her own if we don't. And then we're not going to have the chance. And so that kind of got us to take action.
It was the best day ever when I was like, I'm thinking about doing this, but is that crazy? Is it like so much work? Would I just be insane to do this? And instead of you responding with whether it's a good idea or not, you responded with an invitation to join you. I was like, oh my God, this is like the best outcome that ever could have happened. And I feel like I remember you guys saying something about like, you couldn't believe I said yes. And you were like so happy that I would come, do this with you rather than on my own. I'm like, what? Are you kidding me? Like you already have this well-oiled machine where you've done all the legwork and I just get to like float right in without having to do any of that hard stuff. So it definitely felt like I was the fortunate one for sure to be able to do that. And it's been such a gift. I mean, I love you guys so much and I like so value how close we've gotten. I mean, it's crazy to me how little time we've actually spent together in real life, but how close we've been able to get just over the airways being far apart. And, I think just it's sort of a dream come true then to also, I think we're all like pretty nerdy and I don't know about you, but I get more starstruck by book authors than I would, like really big actors, celebrities and musicians. And, to be able to talk to people, really smart people who have written these tremendous books. It just like, I still kind of pinch myself even 4 years later.
I just want to piggyback on what you're saying about how we do most of our work virtually. We all live in different places, although the two of you are closer now than you used to be since Jill moved across the country. But we have seen each other in person. And that is one of the meaningful things is that the rare occasions when I get to hang out with you guys in person, when we happen to be in town at the same time or at a conference or something like that, it is just the best. It is so much fun.
It's such a treat.
So fun.
It's very funny because nobody knows how much taller I am than both of you.
I know. That was the shock. That's always the shock is the height thing. It's like, oh my gosh, you were so tall. I had no idea. Jill and I are both shorties. In fact, I think, Jill, you might be shorter than me, which I rarely meet people. So,
how tall are you?
5'3". How tall are you?
Too. Well, okay. Technically 5'2 3/4. So you might have a quarter inch on me.
I always say 5'3.5", but my husband and children have been pushing back on that. They think I'm fibbing with that half inch.
Well, they measure you at the doctor's office again once you're over 40. They measure you as a kid, then they stop measuring you, and now they measure you again to make sure you're not shrinking. That's like, a developmental rite of passage that I am not a fan of.
So we've gotten a lot older as we've podcasted, but a lot of things have stayed the same. Like our mission is still the same, to share evidence-based psychology in an accessible way, to bring new ideas, powerful ideas that can help people flourish in lots of different pockets of their lives, their work, their relationships, and their health. So we have had a consistent mission throughout. But we've also tried to kind of move with the times flexibly and add new things. And one of my favorite new additions to Psychologists Off the Clock is our book club. It's become a highlight of my month. It's an opportunity. You know, a lot of podcasting is like you're talking with a guest, with an author, or, you know, somebody who's an expert in a particular area. And then you kind of send it out into the world and you don't necessarily hear a lot back. I mean, we know people are listening, but there's not a lot of interaction with people who are listening. But the book club is this awesome pocket of time each month where we also talk about fiction and memoirs, which is really fun, but from a psychological lens. And it's just a really great opportunity to engage with people who are interested, who are not necessarily the people that we have on as guests, but who are really gaga for the same kind of content that we are.
And it's a real book club, not a wine club. Like, you know how so many people have book clubs where they like go to their friend's house and never talk about the book and just drink wine? It's not drinking wine and not talking about books. Although maybe people would like that. Maybe wine should be consumed at the book club too. But it's like actual talk about books, right?
You can bring whatever beverage you want to the book club. And actually, my favorite thing, I love the book club. And by the way, occasionally I don't read or don't finish the book, and that's okay. Like, so I want people to know that if they are thinking of joining the book club but aren't sure they'll be able to finish every book, it's okay. You can come anyway. But also, to me, one of the things about it is that it's a chance for us to interface with our listeners directly, which sometimes you feel like you're putting this into a black hole and you don't know who's hearing it. And I love being able to have that kind of interaction and relationship. So we always want to invite our listeners to be in touch with us. And one of the things that I love is when we do hear from our listeners, especially if we've done something on the podcast that has meant something to a listener, or that, you know, touched a nerve for them or enhanced their life in some special way. I think it just is a reminder of, wow, this is work that is having a positive impact on people's lives. And one example that I will remember, I just remember this from years ago, is that we had done an episode specifically about gender and sexual minorities. And this was an episode we did years ago with Matt Skinta and Ashlyn Leonard Curtin about clinical work with gender and sexual minorities. And afterward, a transgender listener reached out to thank us for doing the episode. Mm-hmm. And I just felt so, I don't know, I just appreciated that so much. And it felt to me so values aligned, like that we had done an episode that somebody found important in some way, and especially someone from a group where maybe they don't get that kind of representation very often.
Well, you guys know you like literally saved my child from being sexually abused.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Jill sent us an email about Feather, your interview with Feather Burkauer. And that was an example of, that's how we got that. I think that was how we ended up inviting Jill, because at the bottom of her signature of the email, it said that she was the author of The Big Book of Act Metaphors, which of course I know that book. And I was like, oh, this is such a nice email. She was talking about what a difference the episode had made. And I was like, and also she's author of this book. We should have her on.
Yeah. I mean, I listened to the episode with Feather Burkauer about protecting kids from sexual abuse, and she was talking all about signs of grooming, many of which, I mean, I really learned so many new things, like many things I just really did not know before. And shortly after that, I observed every last one of those things happening right in front of my eyes, which that was one of the things I didn't understand about grooming, is that often perpetrators do this right in front of you, because it sort of makes you think like, oh, well, they must not be doing anything bad. But truly, like, I don't think I would have known what I was seeing if I hadn't listened to that episode. And yeah, and I almost didn't reach out to you. You know, I was like a huge fan. This was my favorite podcast. And I felt like such a silly little fangirl. But because of ACT and psychological flexibility, I was like, no, I really want to share this appreciation. This is values driven, even though I feel silly. And I didn't get a response right away. And I was like, oh man, now I really feel silly. Of course, these big celebrities, they aren't going to write back to me.
I just have to laugh at that.
I know.
Huge celebrities, right?
That's how it felt at the time. And then I think it was Yael that wrote back saying, oh, just to kind of slip through the cracks. They had been behind on email or whatever. And you had shared my email with Feather. And I forget if it was you or her, but one of you said, you did the right thing. And I was just like sobbing because no one had really, the way that I intervened when this thing happened, no one had really said that to me before. I mean, it was like, not only did it protect my kid, but it was like really healing for me to have that interaction, especially from people who I see as being like so competent, and it just really meant the world to me. And then to have that email end with, by the way, you wrote one of our favorite books, want to come be a guest? I was like, oh my God, I'm having a panic attack. and I was so nervous to come on and be a guest. But I also love the way something that was a very, very painful experience turned into like one of my most cherished professional activities. So I was one of those listeners. Aww. I actually just got an email that I think I shared with you guys, somebody who had a traumatic brain injury and had said that he hadn't experienced a lot of laughter and joy in a while, and listening to the episode with Kelly Leonard had like really activated that part of him, and he was feeling really grateful. And I shared that with Kelly too. I thought it would be meaningful for him to get to read that as well.
And just so our listeners know, those kinds of emails those do mean a lot to us. And so if you're thinking about sending us one of those and you're feeling a little shy about it,
many compliments as
please send us send compliments. No, but we do love hearing from our listeners. It helps us feel like we have a connection with you that's more direct. So if you're thinking about it, reach out. We'd love to hear from you.
Or join our book club and come chat about books that you love with us, because that's fun too.
Yes, for sure.
I really liked recently. So Debbie and Yael and I, in addition to co-hosting the podcast together, we're also writing partners, and we read each other's drafts of things and we offer suggestions for edits. So when Debbie and I were reading Yael's early drafts of Work, Parent, Thrive, I noticed that many of the people that she cited were our previous podcast guests. And then when I wrote my Imposter No More book, same thing. I mean, so I think I cited Nira Yael, Erica Suter, Kelly McGonigal, Ayelet Fishbach, Jess Leahy, Juliet Lithgott-Hames, Michaela Thomas, Zoe Chance, and there might have even been more. I mean, those were just the initial people that came to mind. And Yael, I'm sure your list is just as long. And I think part of what I appreciate is, of course, the real reason we're doing this is to get this information out to listeners. And for me, a big part of it is that it's free, right? It's like not everybody has the resources to go to therapy. And podcasting is a way that people, not that it's a replacement for therapy, of course, but it's not a substitute for therapy, but it is a way that people can access this information that doesn't require having a lot of resources. But I think the other thing that happened that I didn't realize would happen is like how much I have learned personally and how much I've grown, and how much I use the things that we've learned in these episodes in my everyday life. Have you guys found the same?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I use it in my clinical work. I use it in my life. I purposely have picked a few people because I want to write about them in my book, my burnout book. And so I'm like, ooh, I want to talk about this in my burnout book. I'm going to invite them on the podcast. But then also we do tons of reading for the podcast. So, if we interview an author, we read their books, but I love that because I think sometimes it's hard to motivate to do professional reading, but because I have to interview them, I need to get it together and spend a couple days trying to make it through as much of the book as I can. And so, I mean, it's just helped me feel like a lifelong learner. And I have really appreciated, the ideas. We sometimes have some really groundbreaking ideas, but then also the practical application of it, how it's really been helpful. How about you, Yael?
Yeah, without question. I think so many I would say that I have interviewed authors who have changed how I approach clinical practice, how I approach relationships, how I approach parenting, how I approach my to-do list, how I approach mindfulness, how I interact with my own anxiety. And it's just really made such a huge impact on my life. And I find that, my favorite episodes are the ones where I picked up a book and I'm like, wow, this is like transformative. I wonder if I can actually speak with this author. That's happened a few times where I have encountered a book where I'm like, this changes everything.
Give us like your top 1, 2, or 3 examples. Do you have like any specific examples that have really transformed you? Yeah.
For sure. So one of my more recent ones that I'm still feeling a little obsessed with is Quit with Annie Duke. I just love the idea of rebranding, quitting, right? I feel like that's like a change everything kind of idea where it is okay to leave behind the things that don't work, to quit them, because it opens you up to really wholeheartedly engage with the things that are going to continue to be important to you. Some of the more surprising ones are Rethinking Delusions with Victoria Shepherd. That was a book that I never would have picked up because it's a history book, but it really changed the way that I think about delusions and kind of recognizing that all of us to some extent have delusional thinking and how to engage with people who maybe think in drastically different ways than you do. And I think that was one of those conversations where as we were going through the episode, she and I were both having light bulbs like going off and like, oh, I never thought about it that way, because I was coming at it as a clinical psychologist and she was coming at it as a social historian. And then, other ones that I think were really transformative were episodes that I recorded at like really pivotal moments in my life. So the one that comes to mind is Bearing Unbearable Loss with Joanne Cacciatore. So I recorded a few episodes on grief and death and dying right after my father passed away because I was really struggling. And so I did what I always do, which is I start to read anything I can get my hands on that I think could be helpful. And I found some really beautiful transformative books. And that book was really powerful. And it was so incredible that I had the opportunity to talk to her in this time of deep grief, this expert in loss and grief. And I think I cried during the episode, but it was one of those episodes where I just have so much gratitude for being able to have that conversation and being able to bring those ideas to other people who are going through difficult experiences too.
Yeah, that's awesome.
How about you, Jill?
Well, I was just going to say with the Quit episode, you were saying that it really helped you personally, and it helped me with parenting because it made me rethink when my kids want to quit something in a way that just like made me feel like I could exhale and that I'm not like a horrible person if I let my kid quit something, before the season is done or whatever the case may be. But I think the two that were the most professionally transformative for me are probably The Joy of Movement with Kelly McGonigal. I mean, this book was like a love letter to exercise. And my whole life, I've had a really complicated relationship with exercise. And it really changed the way I thought about movement. And, now I exercise nearly every day. And the other one, of course, will come as no surprise because I'm such a huge fangirl, but Eve Rodsky and Fair Play literally saved my marriage. And my marriage is truly better than it has ever been. And that is in huge part to that book and to Eve's work on, having a fair distribution of labor in the home with your partner.
I just want to sort of comment that Fair Play in those episodes and her book are ones that I'm constantly recommending to couples in my private practice because she offers a really transformative framework to think about distribution of domestic labor that I think isn't necessarily intuitive, but it's just so helpful. So
because it's like a system.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and I will say
too.
Oh, it's so good. And she has a documentary now with Reese Witherspoon's, what's it called? Hello Sunshine Company. That's wonderful. I mean, she's just amazing. And I will say the other ones, it's several people, but it's all similar ideas. So like free range parenting, the gift of failure, how to raise an adult and be an adult, Julia Lithcott-Hames, Jess Leahy, Lenore Skenazy. Are there others with that same? They're really similar.
Self-driven child.
Yeah. So like all of those that have that similar theme about like letting your kids be independent, those were really transformative for me as well. And have like really influenced the way that I interact with and raise my kids. And I think for the better, for sure. What about you, Debbie?
So a couple things. I'm going to start with the very kind of day-to-day transformation. And this is a shout out to Diana, our former co-host. We did an episode really early on about the relationship between food and nutrition and mood. And Diana she's kind of into that. And she had this whole thing about different oils. To this day, I have two kinds of oil in my house, olive oil and avocado oil. And it's because of that conversation with Diana. And so, I cook with those two oils pretty much exclusively. Maybe a little sesame oil once in a while for a stir fry or something like that. But so that's, kind of a more small scale day-to-day thing. I think two that really stick out to me, though, more on a philosophical level, Oliver Burkeman's time management book, 4,000 Weeks, just really was transformative to me. And that's another one I've talked to a lot of clients about, just in terms of really taking a big picture look at what's important to you and letting yourself off the hook. For me, it's email. Like, I'm just so terrible at keeping up with email, and it really stresses me out. And I blow off a lot of emails, and now I feel like Oliver Burkeman has given me permission to do that, because sometimes I'm doing it in the service of, spending time with my family or writing a book or something that's ultimately more important to me. And I feel like his work just really, that book was so influential in my life. In fact, I saw someone checking it out at the library recently, and I had to stop her and be like, oh, I love that book. And she's like, me too. I've read it before. I'm checking it out again so I can reread it. So, and then the other one was Devin Price's book, Laziness Does Not Exist, which I just think we're so hard on ourselves sometimes. And we are in such a hustle and grind culture. And to me, Devin's work really helped me take a look at some of the ways that shows up for me and my clients and my friends and family, that is just really problematic. And so another one that philosophically just helped me see things in a whole new way. And I just really appreciate their voices in terms of having a big influence on how I look at certain things in a new light. Yeah.
Those are such good ones. Can I add a few more? Because I feel like what I love about our podcast is that we talk a lot about, individual well-being, but we also talk about relational well-being. And we've done a couple episodes on relationships that have been so impactful. So I did an episode on Influence is Your Superpower with Zoe Chance, and I'm constantly recommending that one to other people, because I think, what we want is to matter to other people and to be connected to them and to feel influential, so that we can get more of what we want, so that we can feel like our presence really makes a difference. And she offers some really cool tools to be able to do that. And then I haven't done too many episodes about this, which I think is unfortunate because it's such a core piece of doing couples therapy. But I did have a chance to do one episode on sexual intimacy. Let's talk about sex and intimacy with Zoe Kors. And I absolutely love that episode. And again, that's another one that I recommend all over the place in my couples therapy practice, because it is something that we don't talk enough about. And it was so great to be able to bring that to the podcast.
Yeah. And we've talked about trying to do more in that area, and we haven't done it. We'll have to put that back on our list. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, maybe this is like a good moment to just invite people, if there are topics that you feel that are important to you, that feel like relatively untouched or just that you'd like to see more of, please feel free to email us. We love to hear sort of what's important to you. And, it's always, there's so many interesting topics and things that we want to cover in this podcast, but it helps us to know what's important for listeners, that can help us to sort of like orient or sort of hone in ways that are most helpful.
Yeah, and we've taken listener recommendations before and found books and guests based on those recommendations.
Totally. Listeners. Actually, another favorite episode of mine is the episode Future Tense with Tracy Dennis Tawari. Moises Hernandez, who's a listener, who's now a book club member, recommended that. And that's like one of my favorite books that I recommend to everybody too. So yeah, there's others as well, but absolutely we take recommendations, and it's fun for us because sometimes we wouldn't otherwise be aware of a really great book. So for people to call things to our attention is quite helpful.
I think going back to something you said earlier, Yael, about how you can sort of tell where we're at in our lives, like going from parenting episodes of younger kids to parenting episodes of older kids, or maybe that was you, Debbie, that you were noticing the shift to like the tween kids.
Yes. From toddlers to tweens. My features have shifted over the years.
Exactly.
Right?
And that's one of the greatest things, is that we can interview people that are like related to our personal interests that we still think are going to have value to our listeners. And I've noticed just how many episodes we've done, similar to 4,000 Weeks. They all have their own spin, but they kind of boil down to stop doing the stuff you don't want to do anymore, get some rest, and only do the things that really, really matter to you, right? So we've had, Alex Payne came on to talk about rest. Yeah. We've had essentialism. I just interviewed Vanessa Patrick on the power of saying no, 4,000 weeks. I mean, there are several more that all have the same theme that I think, it's like really a comment on the culture we live in and how busy we are and how much we're all really craving, I don't know, just really like spending this limited time that we have in ways that really matter and that are quality. Oh, subtract is another one.
That's one of my favorites too. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a good one with Lighty Clots. Yeah. So it's like a projective test. Everybody's getting a little glimpse into what's going on with us depending on. In fact, I'm doing an upcoming interview on menopause. I'm turning 50 this month. So
coincidence? I think not. Right. Asking for a friend, right, Jill?
Yeah, exactly.
And then there's sort of like the building happiness side of things. So not just, reducing what we don't want, but increasing what we want more of. So we've done a number of episodes on happiness, for example, The Science of Happy with Sonia Lubomirsky. I love that episode. Happier with Tal Ben-Shahar, Grounded to Soar with Brad Stolberg, and Happily Even After with Jonah Paquette. And for me, I think psychology can sometimes be unfairly pigeonholed as a practice to kind of reduce the negative, but there's so, positive psychology is just full of tools to increase the positive, which can help us manage what's hard, some of the unavoidable things in life that are hard. So that's been another genre of podcast topics that I think, I don't know, I can't get enough of that topic.
Yeah,
either.
I love those too.
This thought is just coming to me that I think there have been times too, we do pick topics that have a personal relevance to our lives, but there's times that we've used the podcast to help us make sense of the world. And I'm really thinking, we did a lot of episodes when COVID was first happening that were really meant to help our listeners and us just come to terms with what was going on. And one that we did as a co-host episode a few months back was on hope in this dark world, in this dark time that we're living in. And that to me, it was just such a chance to kind of talk about something that I personally was struggling with and grappling with. And it really did help me make some sense out of what was happening. And so I love that too. And I hope some of our listeners share that experience, that it can, sometimes we pick timely topics because we feel like this is what the world needs. I also think some of our racial justice episodes have had that feel too of, this is something we all need to take a look at. Let's use the podcast as a platform for that. So it's helped me, I think, sometimes just navigate this world that we're living in.
Yeah, I did a number of episodes that had a sexism bend, essentially. And it was coming on the heels of Me Too and what was happening with Justice Kavanaugh and all of that kind of stuff. And I think you're exactly right, Debbie. That was a way to try to process and make sense of the world. And maybe this is a good segue. I was going to ask you guys if you had any really memorable moments from the podcast. And mine actually came out of one of those gender and sexism. And it was when I interviewed Alicia Menendez, who wrote the book, The Likeability Trap. And she's most known as being an anchor on MSNBC. And after we were done interviewing, we were just chatting, but I hadn't yet turned off the recording. And she called me a masterful interviewer. And she was one of my early guests. So I was still feeling a lot of the imposterism, who the hell do I think I am to be interviewing a professional interviewer, And so for her to say that was it was just such an amazing moment for me. And then I was able to save the clip. In fact, we could even splice it into this episode because I saved it. So whenever I'm feeling bad, I just go back and remember that moment where Alicia Menendez called me a masterful interviewer. So I'm going to go ahead and splice that clip in now. This has never been heard before by anyone other than me. So have a listen to Alicia Menendez calling me a masterful interviewer.
You were such a masterful interviewer. Thank you so much for the prep you put in this, for your thoughtfulness, such a natural conversationalist. I'm going to download.
Well, that means a lot from someone who does this for a living. So thank you so much for saying
I am very critical of it, and you are a natural talent, and I can tell that you put in the work. It's like, it is very gracious on the other side to be like, oh, you actually read the material.
Well, I try to only do interviews with people that I feel really excited and passionate to talk about, because you can tell it just makes for a better interview, and it's more fun for me.
I'm going to go buy a copy of the anxiety book for myself and for...
Oh, thanks. I'll send you a copy if you want.
No. Now that I understand the economics of books, I'm going to purchase it.
And what about you guys? Do you have any moments like that are really memorable for you?
When you posed that question, the episode that my mind immediately went to was the episode for my book, Work, Parent, Thrive, that the three of us did. It was just such a delightful conversation. It was so funny, and you guys were so encouraging and supportive. And it was amazing because you'd been with me throughout the journey of the book, and it was this opportunity to bring the book out into the world and to do it with my two close friends in this fun atmosphere. So that was the episode that immediately came to my mind as an unforgettable moment. Debbie, how about you?
Well, we all thought about this question in advance, and I struggled so much because I was thinking about how so many of the people who have come on, it's just been so powerful. So one side of that is when somebody that I know, either a friend or somebody that I have a professional relationship, comes on, and we are able to kind of use our platform to raise their voice. So Yael, your book was an example of that. And I was actually thinking of another example. There've been several, but so my colleagues and friends, Jennifer Shepard Payne and Corinne Williams, came on to talk about racial trauma. And Jennifer shared a poem. She's come on again since then to talk about her book, Out of the Fire. But when she shared her poem, and then Corinne talked about her experience in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd and how that led her to start this whole program, it had this deep personal meaning to me because I know them both and I'm just so blown away by their work. And then there are those people that we don't know, but who are just lovely humans that we learn from and we connect with. And sometimes I've never talked to them before in my life. But we connect over the course of an hour of having this conversation. So that has happened with a lot of our guests before. I was just thinking of Jeff Cohen, who came on to talk about his work on belonging uncertainty. We really clicked and I really enjoyed talking to him. And again, I feel bad picking one because there were so many of these moments it was hard to choose. But so Scott Sonnenschein had a book called Stretch, and he was just a wonderful person to talk to. I really appreciate his work. I kind of want to spread the word on this one. So I'm happy to have a chance to do this, but he's an organizational psychologist who talks about this tension between growth and kind of wanting to chase the bigger, more, versus when do you kind of stay content with what you have? And instead of trying to grow, you try to kind of stretch using the resources that you have. And I used the conversation on the podcast to ask him about that as relates to our work, because we were kind of at the cusp of starting to grow as a podcast. And so I feel like I got a little expert consultation from him, and I just really enjoyed what he had to say. So here's a little excerpt from my conversation with Scott Sonnenschein.
Stretching is not about toning down our ambitions, deciding that we just should stay small. Stretching is also a pathway to success. But the question you got to start with is, how do you define success? Now, if you define success as, I want to think about impact, and I realize that if I've got more listeners out there, I'm going to be able to engage with more people, and the ideas and the guests that I have on the show are going to have a bigger impact on their lives. That sounds like responsible growth. Now, if you're growing because you say, I want to be able to let people know that we've hit a certain audience number, or we've had this amount of success, or podcasts are just supposed to have as many listeners as possible. those would be more of the chasing type of growth. So I think you should start off by saying, what's the reason for the growth? And if it's about impact and helping other people, then it makes sense to go ahead and do that. If it's simply to put a trophy up on the wall to feel better because of what other podcasts might be doing, or to even just get people to listen or to kind of get them signed up for the podcast, but not truly engage with the material, just to inflate your listenership numbers, that's more of the chasey type of growth.
Thank you for the free consultation. Yeah, it's very much values based. What are we here for? What are we doing? And I think you're right. It's not either or, that there is a sense of kind of quality and quantity, right? Like wanting to reach people but reach people who are going to actually want this and benefit from it and find it helpful versus just sheerly pursuing numbers for the sake of numbers.
Right. And you see this, a lot on social media these days, where people try and build up their followings to feel better about themselves, to make it seem like they're more important than they are. And they're just getting a bunch of random people in there, as opposed to thinking about what their purpose for doing any of this stuff is. And if we start with our purpose, and then growth is directed at something that we care about.
The other thing this is making me think of is how much I enjoy, of course, we listen to each other's episodes too. And I get so lit up when I'm listening to your episodes. And, if it's just like, if I can really sense that you're like really clicking with the person you're interviewing with, like it's not, I have a positive reaction when I'm learning something and the content is cool, but I have an even more positive reaction that's kind of like when I feel really proud of you because the interview is going really well. And there's a million examples of that, but the one that just happens to pop in my mind was when Yael interviewed Angela Duckworth about grit.
Yes!
And
when you said that, I had the same thought. Jill, that came to mind. I applauded at the end of that episode. Yeah. I was listening to it in my car because it had that feel. Yes. Same page.
And also when Yael interviewed Annie Duke about quit, that interview was like 90 minutes. And when it was over, I was like, oh my God, it's already over. And it was like the longest interview we've ever had. And my like overwhelming feeling, in addition to like, wow, that was really cool content, was like, wow, good job, Yael.
Yes.
And that's like such a nice feeling to feel like proud of your friends and colleagues.
The backstory on this is that I think that you guys sometimes feel extra proud of me because, as Jill once put it, my branding is self-conscious. So you guys are just like in my corner trying to bolster me, which means so much to me. I think it's the sweetest thing ever.
No, but you also really did do a great job and did a great job with those and many others as well.
I'm holding on to my branding. So here's a clip from my interview with Angela Duckworth, which happened actually to be our 200th episode. 100 episodes ago. That's wild.
I can't believe that was 100 episodes ago. Wow.
When to grit and when to quit would be one way to ask that question. And I think it's a very good one because you can imagine, and in fact, I don't have to imagine much because I've done this before, like the pursuit of a stupid goal stubbornly, that is actually now crowding out energy that you could put towards a better goal, right? I think the recommendation I have is that people ought to try for the following. Try to keep your grit for your higher level goals. Like I do have a highest level. So you mentioned superordinate goals. I mean, I've recently in the last year, realized that probably the most succinct way I can phrase my top level professional goal is to increase psychological literacy.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. I've been teaching this class to undergraduates and, I'm having them reflect on their goals and I do all the same homework assignments that my students do. That. So in the course of that experience, I thought I think what I'm really trying to do is increase psychological literacy. So anyway, I think I should be extremely gritty about that highest level goal. Right. And I don't know what would make me give it up. But I think if it's a very particular low level goal, it's like, get this grant from this foundation, develop a paper with this particular person, then I think you should be flexible, actually. And I have in my life, countless times, I think, been gritty at the wrong level of my goal hierarchy.
So I and all of my co-host colleagues practice acceptance and commitment therapy, but it really relies on this clarified value idea. So like, and I think that superordinate goal is in a sense your highest level value. And then the objective is to identify committed actions that kind of align with your higher level values. And then underneath, what you're always aiming for in acceptance and commitment therapy is to develop something called psychological flexibility, which is the ability to persist or desist depending both on your values and on your internal and external circumstances. And so I actually think that the idea of grit and how you build it is very aligned with some of the philosophies of acceptance and commitment therapy.
Now I'm going to have to use a little self-control because now all I want to do is interview you because I'm very interested in acceptance and commitment therapy.
I think obviously one of the really cool parts of podcasting is that we get to like come face to face, virtually, of course, with the people we idolize, the stars, the rock stars in our worlds, which again are not like, it's not Bon Jovi or I don't know, Bon Jovi.
Try Taylor Swift. Oh my God. How old are we anyway?
But in any case, who have you guys been most starstruck to interview on the pod?
I think for me, that's probably Lori Gottlieb, who wrote Maybe You Should Talk to Someone, because I loved that book. I'm like such a reader. I read every single day of my life, both fiction and nonfiction. And, for me, when I really, really love a book, if I can connect with that author, it just, it's like more meaningful than if it were Bon Jovi. And so that was like a really big bestseller, and she's done her TED Talk, and she just seemed like so famous. And so that was one where I remember being like very nervous and very starstruck. What about you, Debbie?
Mine is not going to resonate for people who are not ACT therapists, but when Steve Hayes came on the podcast and I interviewed him, I felt so nervous, and I think I just had him on such a professional pedestal, and I think he's a big figure within our field. And so people who are not therapists and not ACT therapists would be like Steve, who, they wouldn't necessarily have that association, but I think within our field, I felt pretty nervous and intimidated, and he was great and so nice. And I've met him before at conferences and that kind of thing. And I think I was very nervous about it though. Very intimidated.
Yeah.
How about you, Yael?
I think I feel starstruck by everybody. It's strange because I've been doing this for a really long time, but quite literally every single time I do a podcast interview, I get really, really nervous. It takes me several minutes to settle in and to calm down and for my prefrontal cortex to come back online. And that's true of people that are sort of, I don't know, less famous authors. Because I read the books and I'm like, wow, this is so brilliant. I can't imagine like how a brain could come up with that idea. That's amazing how they've portrayed it and made it so helpful for a reader. And I also, want to like engage in conversation and offer something so that it's more of a back and forth. So I think I easily put myself in the starstruck mode.
Yeah. I don't know what, something that you just said triggered this thought in me, that one of the other things I really appreciate in terms of the way I think this podcast has helped me grow is using psychological flexibility. I step out of my comfort zone to invite people who I think are too big, too important. Who am I to think I can ask this person to come on our little podcast and talk to little old me, right? I've just gotten to the point where I'm like, I'll ask absolutely anybody, because what's the worst that happens? They say no, and you can handle that. And it's not that big a deal. And do you want to know who was the best model of that? It was Debbie Sorensen when she invited none other than Michelle Obama to be on Psychologists Off the Clock.
I mean, this is a little embarrassing to think that I even did this, but I saw something about her new book and how it has all these themes that are relevant to our podcast. And, we're in contact with publishers a lot because they send us books and sometimes they arrange interviews and they reach out sometimes to us. And so I just, on a wing and a prayer, said, why not? Maybe she'll come.
Why not?
She said no. And I got the most polite email back about how Mrs. Obama is very busy with her book. And I just was like a little bit like, I can't believe I just did that. It was just such a, ridiculous thing to do. But yes, I did. And she said no, understandably. Not? Of course she said no, but
you miss 100% of the chances you don't take. And she might have said yes. Who cares? Like, it's not like your ego is so bruised you can't get out of bed the next day. Like, you can. That's what I think the growth for me has been, is I can handle no. It's not a big deal. Like, it's a rejection, and like maybe it stings the tiniest bit, but it's fine. And what it's led to is lots of people saying yes that I never in a million years thought would say yes. And that's really freaking cool.
Well, and the truth is, if Michelle Obama would have said yes, I would have been, I don't know if I would have ever been able to actually handle that. So we'll never know. But
anyway, you would have rocked it anyway. It's true, though. I mean, that practice and psychological flexibility of doing things, even things that were like, who am I to ask this person, has really, it just invites a lot of courage, which doesn't mean it's not scary, but it gives you, a little bit of, okay, well, what's the worst that could happen is they'll say no. I feel like that was the practice that helped me reach out for blurbs for my book. And I was like, a few years ago, I never would have reached out to these amazingly important, influential, busy people. And amazingly, a number of them said yes. And I also got some no's, but it's sort of that practice of like, okay, can I do this thing because it matters, even if it doesn't turn out exactly the way that I want? Because as you just said, Jill, we miss 100% of the opportunities that we don't take.
Well, we will wrap up here in a minute, but we wanted to just thank all of our listeners. I mean, we really appreciate the people who have listened, the guests who have come on the show, and just wanted to give a heartfelt thank you to all of you who have been listening along the way. Thank you. Thank you. We really appreciate it.
We wouldn't be a podcast without listeners. So we love the support. And thank you to our behind the scenes crew, to Michael Harold, who's our strategic consultant, and to Jadine Stout-Williams, who is our podcast manager. Well, you guys, happy 300th episode. Congratulations.
Happy 300th episode.
Congratulations, and more to come.
More to come. And now for your listening enjoyment, a couple of our silly bloopers.
Okay. All right, shall I kick us off? Are you ready for this, Jill?
Go for it. I'm ready.
Okay. Debbie and Jill are here. Oh, okay. Sorry.
That's a good blooper.
Especially that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh my God. I just realized I was like doing the thinking, the listening. Oh,
waiting to speak.
I was like, oh shoot, how am I going to wrap this up? And then
you missed what I said. It was brilliant, just so you know.
Oh. Well, we now have a blooper reel. Okay, sorry. Let me do that again. Except now I'm going to laugh.
Hey, rather handsome man. Sorry. Okay, sorry.
Now that was your podcast voice.
Right now. Yeah.
Hey, Psychologists Off the Clock listeners, I'm going to guess that if you got to the end of this episode, that you also love to geek out about books in psychology.
If you don't know where to store all your books and people are already complaining that you talk about this book that you're reading all the time, then why don't you join us once a month to read a book together?
If you're interested in joining us, we hope you are. Just send an email to offtheclockpsych@gmail.com and we'll send you more information.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. If you enjoy our podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review or contributing on Patreon.
You can get more psychology tips by subscribing to our newsletter and connecting with us on social media.
We'd like to thank our strategic consultant, Michael Harold, and our podcast production manager, Jadine Stout-Williams.
This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatment. If you're having a mental health emergency, dial 911. If you're looking for mental health treatment, please visit the resources page of our website, offtheclockpsych.com.